associations that pull us in different directions. And because they're operating behind the scenes, we often don't notice when they show up. These biases form over time. They don't require malicious intent or any sort of deliberate effort to judge people unfairly. Instead, they develop through repeated exposure to messages, media, cultural norms, historical narratives, social structures, you name it. A person can grow up surrounded by subtle cues that suggest that certain groups of people are more dangerous, or more intelligent, or more capable, or more emotional, or more reliable. Any of those judgments and those cues, when they're repeated often enough, become part of the mental shortcuts our brains use to make sense of the world. These shortcuts aren't always wrong, and the brain uses them for a reason. We all rely on heuristics to move through daily life because processing every piece of information from scratch would be absolutely exhausting. But the problem is that when these shortcuts are built on distorted information, they don't just save time, they end up causing harm. Implicit bias can show up in countless contexts. In hiring decisions, for example, studies have shown that identical resumes get different responses depending on the name at the top. conditions. If we're always shown the same kinds of people in the same kinds of roles, doctors, criminals, geniuses, maids, villains, heroes, we absorb those patterns and our brains file them away, even if we never stop to question why. You might be thinking that awareness is enough to solve this, but it's not. Knowing about implicit bias is a first step. It's not a solution. You can't just take an online test and declare yourself clean. These biases run deep, and they don't disappear just because we decide they shouldn't exist. Changing them takes conscious effort, reflection, accountability, and uncomfortable conversations. It means questioning your gut feelings instead of just trusting them. It means asking yourself whether your immediate reaction to someone is based on who they are or what they look like. It means being willing to slow down in moments when your brain wants to speed up and draw a quick conclusion. It also means changing the systems that reward and reinforce bias. It's not just about individuals checking themselves. It's about institutions revising how they evaluate performance, how they train employees, how they define success, how they handle complaints. It's about examining the default settings of society, the norms, the policies, the expectations, and asking whether those defaults are truly neutral or whether they quietly advantage some while disadvantaging others. See, bias doesn't operate in a vacuum. It shows up in patterns. If a certain group is always getting the benefit of the doubt, while another is constantly having to prove themselves, that's not a coincidence. That's the cumulative effect of thousands of biased decisions, most of which probably seemed completely harmless at the time. One of the most sobering things about implicit bias is how early it starts. Children as young as 3 or 4 begin to show preferences and stereotypes that mirror the messages around them. Now, that doesn't mean that they're bad. It just means they're absorbing what they see and hear, and their brains are trying to make sense of it. That's why representation matters. That's why it's not just about who's in the room, but who's visible and who's celebrated, who's allowed to be complex. Because what kids see becomes part of what they expect, and what we expect without realizing it shapes what we accept. None of this is about blaming people for being biased, so don't think that that's where I'm going with this. It's about responsibility. You didn't choose your biases, but you are responsible for what you do with them. You're responsible